as you know also, President Ruto is the champion for the African reform agenda, African Union reform agenda. And over and above that, he has been at the forefront in articulating reform of the global governance structures, both within the financial architecture and also within the other agencies, including the United Nations, and more so the UN Security Council. So this is a very critical step in his drive to ensure that Africa gets its rightful position within the international arena. All the processes, starting from the conversation with our permanent representatives, both within the AU and the United Nations, then moving forward to the ministerial segment, we have come to a successful conclusion on what are the next steps and what we ought to do, particularly bearing in mind that this issue has been on the agenda for a long time. For 20 years now, we continue to have this conversation. And yet this year, the United Nations was celebrating its 80th anniversary. And the whole process of reform still continues to linger on. The first round when they incorporated members to the Permanent Security Council was at the very beginning. Then in the 60s, they made some adjustment. Africa was left out. And to this date, Africa has not had any representative within the United Nations Security Council on a permanent basis. So this is what we seek to address. So the Africa position has been firmed up. We are seeking this is the common African position, 2 permanent slots in the UN Security Council. And we are also saying that Africa should have 5 non-permanent security slots. That means each region is covered within the continent. And that is what we are pursuing.
Today is a very momentous occasion for us as the African continent, having our ministers for foreign affairs to adopt the African model on the reform of the Security Council. As His Excellency, the Foreign Affairs Minister of Kenya said, President William Ruto has been one of the consistent advocates for reform of the global governance system, including the reform of the UN Security Council. So for 20 years as a global community, but also as the African continent, we've been speaking about reform of the Security Council based on the common African position, which has been articulated by His Excellency, the Foreign Minister. But for us as permanent representatives at the UN, we did not have the tools with which to negotiate with other groups that are interested in this. So we needed, for example, to develop a model on the basis of which we needed to engage with other groups from other continents, or other interest groups, for example, groups from the small island states, which also have put forward a position. There are groups from the Arab states, which also have put forward their models. So today is a very important day for those of us who work or represent our countries at the UN in New York, because now we have, as I said, a framework that we are going to use to engage with other groups. Secondly, in terms of the process, from this point on, we've been given the mandate to present the African position to the co-chair of the UN Security Council reforms. That's the permanent representative of Kuwait, who will then use the African model together with all the other models that have been put forward by other groups to develop a consolidated model. So it's our hope that that will be achieved during the current session of the General Assembly, which is the 79th session. Then beyond that, once we've achieved some form of consensus on that, then we will then move to the penultimate phase, which will be the text-based negotiations. But that will come further down the road.
Today is a very important day because we have made a tremendous step towards advancing the mandate of C-10, which was to promote and advocate for the Common African Position to be reflected in the UN Security Council reform. Today, the foreign ministers who have gathered here in Lusaka have adopted what is called the Freetown outcome. The Freetown outcome includes the African model on UN Security Council reform, an aid memo and a roadmap for engagement, and common African language that will be used in terms of promoting the Common African Position and building consensus on it as the C-10 was mandated. So today, the fact that the Freetown outcome was adopted by consensus is very good because it gives the right instruments for the team in New York to proceed with presenting it to the 79th session of the UN General Assembly so that it can be included in the development of the consolidated model. On our part in Addis Ababa, we've been instructed to put in place mechanisms to ensure that the C-10 is facilitated in terms of resources to allow for the various actors from the heads of state who are the members of C-10, the ministerial team and the ambassadors team to be able to advance the work of the African Union in the reform of the UN Security Council. The reform of the UN Security Council falls within the larger ambit of ensuring that there is a democratic representation of Africa in the institutions not only of governance but also of trade and commerce globally, to ensure that Africa has its rightful place and space in international fora so that it advances the lofty aspirations of the African people with a promise to promote the African agenda globally and ensure that the African voice is heard. So this has been a very successful meeting, and we are looking for a very good outcome in terms of advancing the C-10 mandate.